Hello and Merry Christmas. Robert Ham reporting for Virginia's Second Amendment News. Today we are going to talk about Virginia's 2021-22 budget and the gun control legislation as it pertains to the budget. Now, I was first made aware of this issue by attorney Tim Anderson from a video that he posted to Facebook. So a big shout out to Tim and thank you for making us aware of this issue. For those new to the agenda that we're discussing today, Virginia has had a problem with the Democratic takeover of leadership from November 5th, 2019. There are about 8 different bills in the House and the Senate that make the simple act of owning a firearm illegal and criminalize it up to a Class 5 felony. The simple actions of gathering together with a firearm, maybe in a protest or going to a rally, teaching someone how to use a firearm that could then have those skills used in a self-defense situation, training or allowing your children to hunt and shoot unsupervised, possessing a firearm with one of 13 characteristics that Virginia is now considering banning, as well as high-capacity or standard-capacity magazine bans of anything in excess of 10 rounds. All of these types of things could make you a felon overnight. In response to that, several cities and counties around the state, up to a total of almost 120 now, have filed for sanctuary city status as a way to show their disapproval of these gun control laws. But Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, fired back with his new 2020 proposed budget. This adds an additional $100 million in the Department of Corrections area of the budget, and most of that will go into enforcement of these laws. Let's look at it now. So to find the big problem, we've got to actually look at the 2019-2020 budget. And here on page 175 and line item number 6 and 7, we can see that the general source of funds will be for 2020, $1,223 million and some change, $1.2 billion. Now this is very important. If you look, there is no 2021 or 2022. That's because the balanced budget of Virginia is only approved for 2 years at a time. Now let's look at the proposed budget for 2021 and 2022. Remember, this was actually pre-filed on December 18th, 2019. What we're going to see here on page 400, line item number 6, Fund Sources General again, we see a total funds of $1,325 million and some change. Well, if you contrast the two, that's $110 million in between. That's a big difference. So what's all the money for, and what are they going to do with it? Well, they're going to start by locking you up. I'm getting ready to show you in the budget where they propose to use this money in locking you up. But before I do, let me just make one thing clear. Virginia is most likely going to pass these laws. I'm not happy about it, and neither are you guys. The problem with these laws being passed is that there's a lot of big talk about standing up and fighting in the street. Well, when I look out my window, I don't see any bullets flying, and the likelihood is that that won't happen. So, by the time these bills pass, you're going to have some choices to make, and these are choices you need to make individually. Are you going to register your rifles and firearms? Are you going to move? Or are you going to go out in the street and start fighting? Now, this is not a call to action, but that's literally the choices that you will have. There is an opportunity to vote some of these guys out. Lots of you don't like that idea, but the reality is political change takes verbal pressure, and that's where we are. Okay, let's get back into it. Now, you can find everywhere they plan on spending money to lock you up on page 399 and 400, starting with item Q. This is still under the Department of Corrections headings. Item 1 under Q is allowing for the removal of firearms from persons who pose a substantial risk to themselves and others. And there's a line item of $50,000. In fact, there will be a line item for $50,000 for each of these, and we'll talk about why that's important in just a moment. Item 2 is to prohibit the sale, possession, and transport of assault firearms, trigger activators, and silencers. Number 3 is to increase the penalty for allowing a child to access unsecured firearms. Number 4 is to prohibit possession of firearms for persons subject to final orders of protection. And number 5 is for enforcement of universal background checks. Now, this budget information is big news, and some detractors may actually say that the budget didn't go up, it actually went down. If they do that, I've got a pro tip for you. That didn't actually happen. They just moved around some medical money from one heading to another heading. They went from $1,025 million in 2019 to $827 or $30 million in 2020. And it looks, because of the movement of that $237 million of medical budgeting, it looks like the actual budget went down. But when you look in the total funds like we saw earlier, the budget actually went up by $110 million. So that's a pro tip. Use it wisely. Looking a little closer into the budget on page 377 through 379, we see item C is about upgrading additional facilities with the Department of Corrections construction unit. Isn't that interesting? Moving on to item J, we see that the Department of Corrections plans on upping their security by $1 million, specifically for the phone lines and security systems for the infrastructure. But that's not all. We also see that the Department of Corrections plans on purchasing some land out in Craigsville. Why would they need to buy more land? Why would they need to upgrade existing security and infrastructure? Sure, I guess I could understand that. But what about the construction costs at $1 million in addition to everything else? These were special call-outs. It all has to do with that $50,000 line item tag that we saw in item Q. Let's jump over to the bills and see what they have to say. Virginia law requires that any new bill which could cause someone to go to jail has a financial impact summary assessed to it, just to see the demographics that will be assessed and impacted by the laws. Here, we can see in Senate Bill 64, and it's the same with all of them, that a $50,000 economic impact has been assessed to each infraction that goes to court and is found guilty. Now we know where that $50,000 line item came from in Section Q. Well, if you've been paying attention and following along, you might be asking yourself, just how many people do they plan on locking up? Well, let's do some math and figure that out. This should be simple arithmetic. We'll just take a base of $100 million and divide it by 50,000. And wouldn't you know, that turns out to be 2,000. And if that number sounds low, I'd agree. So I did a little digging and went over to the Virginia Department of Corrections website and just decided to look at population data. Aha! That's where we find the nugget of gold. Keep in mind that we're speaking in broad strokes, but looking at the average daily population of the major institutions, we find that there's about 910 inmates on average in one of these major institutions. Well, that means that Governor Ralph Northam's budget does a lot for his prison population. Item C, if you recall, gives a $1.1 million budget to the construction unit for the Department of Corrections. Item J gives another $1 million to upgrade all of the security in all of their facilities. And item O grants them the right to purchase land in the town of Craigsville. I guess we kind of see the writing on the wall, don't we? A new facility specially made for law-abiding gun-owning citizens like you or I, that after the summer of 2020 may not be so law-abiding after all. I'm Robert Ham for Va2A News, reporting for your rights. Thank you for watching.